Hey guys, Kasal here. You're about to watch Thorin talk and talk and talk. But it's kinda good, I swear.
GamerSupps hit me up with some more freebies, so I thought, you know what, I'll put it on one of my Patreon videos so the real hardcore fans can get in on the action. You've been hearing about it in my intros and my little skits. Want to try some for free? Well, the first 250 people to use the code Thorin, Thorin, at gamersupps.gg, link in the description box below, will be able to get free shipping. So grab yourself some samples. Won't cost you anything at all. After the first 250, the code will revert to my usual 10% off their delicious product. Right, so being as Alice hasn't been to many of these, do you have a topic, mate, that's burning that you wanted to start us off with?
Not one that was burning. I did wanted to ask one that was a rather personal, but I'll refrain from that. But I just wanted to discuss, because I am just thinking, because Valve has now found a model that is, based around growing its game, which is, skins, right? And operations. And I feel like that's the one that they're using to attract players, but it doesn't really help grow the professional scene, because the professional scene is grown kind of almost through players wanting to there's an industry side to it, but there's also players that want to improve on the game, right? That's not related to the skin. So is there do you feel that that's Valve's only way to, in their opinion, to grow the game now? They don't really, because they're not really interested in handling the esports side of their game now as much. They mostly just want to play with the skins and operations aspect just to grow the fan base of it.
I think the tough part is, if there's one thing I'll give Valve credit for, is that they never really have, implied they want to be the ones that steer the esports side of Counter-Strike. They only essentially control the majors because it's their tournament. Even then, they're actually not as hands-on as they probably could be. You might have noticed, it's now claimed by a bunch of the different TOs that even the TO can change some of the things how the qualifiers do. So there might even be more leg room than people realize with Valve. So the problem I have is basically, as far as I can tell, Valve's philosophy, which is not a bad philosophy, is we made the game count. Well, it didn't, but you get a colloquially what I mean. It's our game. We make money off people playing the game, and then the esports shit. Right, that's you guys do that stuff. So you take care of that, and then hopefully there's some loose correlation between the two, because the way I think of esports is, I think that's actually the appropriate division of labor. At the end of the day, the person who owns the IP rights, the game dev in this case, they're basically just managing how many total people come into the game, and from there, I don't really think almost any of the game devs have that much to do with how many people get converted into esports fans. So I can't really blame Valve in that sense. It's not really anything to do with their business model or their business in general as to whether someone who plays the game Counter-Strike turns on an ESL or a Blast broadcast. It doesn't really affect them. I don't know if they actually really care about it. So I definitely think they have a million ways that they could help someone who's just happens to play a game of Assault every now and then, become a fan of an ESL or a Blast broadcast. I just don't really know whether it's really within their purview. I can't just demand they do it because I want the scene to be bigger. I don't even know if I do want the scene to be bigger. So, basically, what's the gist of what you're getting at? Should they do more, or you don't think they do enough?
My general gist was I just wanted to play just against your angle of this. Is because if you look at the way the Dota 2's pro circuit works, right? They have a much bigger handle and interest in growing that aspect. Using not the same model, but they had skins in the game as well. But they also are you my question to you, Thorin, is have you come to peace with the fact that Valve doesn't really because they focus so much attention on Dota 2 and their pro circuit and how they run that circuit, that our circuit is because we grew it naturally by ourselves. You don't mind that Valve doesn't really have to take that much initiative on their own, right? It's obviously you don't.
My problem isn't anything to do with Dota, mate. Not even in contrast. My problem is this, is that every time I ever asked someone, why couldn't we have insert, a feature into CS? If it was in Dota, people would essentially imply, like, I'm talking people in the know here about Valve, etc., like, oh, they don't like to do things the way that they do with Dota, which is like, so wait a minute. So if Dota gets anything good, we're just like prohibited from having that good thing. Like, what? So, like, as far as I can tell, that's why we never were allowed, for example, like double elim in our fucking majors, or we never were allowed this circuit this way, or crowdfunding that was actually reasonable and not based off a premise that stopped making sense in about 2015. Like, that's the problem I have, is like, it's kind of like, if I think you follow League of Legends a bit, like, Alice?
No, I don't watch.
Never mind then, you'll get the premise. But basically, it's one of the main complaints I had about Western League of Legends was that a lot of what I actually think held the European division back is that the Riot's approach was, we're going to grow the LCS, the North American broadcast, and the European broadcast, but because we're doing both and we control both at the top, we're never going to let the European broadcast actually like directly compete with the American broadcast. All it will ever be is like the undercard in the UFC analogy, or it'll be like something that feeds into it. Like, we're trying to take a viewer from the LEC over to the LCS. Whereas, like, what you actually should have done, if you really thought like this is a global game and I'm trying to give as many tools as I can to the different scenes, you just let them compete directly. It's someone who's an LCS fan, probably an LCE fan, so why should, one hamper the other? So my biggest problem is more like, I like the fact that Valve doesn't give a fuck about CSGO. I want them out of CSGO. Every single major esport I've ever been involved with that the developer got in, like, was actually hands-on with, they only ruined it. They had almost nothing. Like you're talking about Dota now, mate, I don't really see many upsides of Dota, aside from the fact that they let the community pay them like a fourth of the money, 3/4 of the money, in order to have a bigger prize pool for the major itself. Like, sure, they give some tools that you can do things with, but essentially what I would say from the beginning is, why aren't those tools just available from day one? Like, as long as you take your cut, you're almost incentivized to let people do their own thing, So I just find that part kind of whack. Like, I don't think we need game devs. I think they just get in the fucking way. We only need them because they have the godlike right to just change anything they want in the fucking game, and the community, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that also rings true, I think, like, in the past when you were on an esports, unfiltered esports with Chairman, right? And you guys were talking about the StarCraft, Blizzard, like, control.
Yes, put it this way, it's kind of wild because a lot of people are coming over to our side now with like the stuff that's actually, I know you don't know League of Legends, but right now there's this whole debate about should they have imports or not. So like, I was way ahead of the game on this. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. I think back in like 2010, I was basically the only person in Western esports pushing for the idea that we shouldn't region lock Koreans out of the West. Because my premise was, like, first of all, there's no, like, nobody is playing professional video games to not starve that night on the street. Like, you don't have to have a job as a video game player. Let's not pretend like this is like, like every random job in the world. Like, it's, at the end of the day, it's a privileged job. Like, you happen to be one of the best, and if you then meet a bunch of other very arbitrary criteria, you can be a pro gamer. So to me, when I watch games, only give a fuck about watching the best quality game. So I don't really care. Like, it's different if we talk about like real world jobs here, because then we're talking about like low level stuff that does affect where people live and can they live in that area. That's a different scenario. So basically, I've always been in favour generally of just like the maximum competition, open things up as much as possible, and then just see what people can do from within that. But I've always been kind of an alien in that sense, mate. Most people really did believe in shit even 10 years ago of like, oh, but if we region lock all the Koreans out, then all the American players will get really good. It's like, if you believe that, mate, that sounds like one of those like, but real communism hasn't been tried yet. It's like, well, you have another track in it then, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually think Valve has done a bit to help the competitive scene. Like, there's the tournament thing in the game now, where it tells you what's coming up. But also,
I mean, that should really be like the most base level expectation, though. Yeah. Like put it this way. I know what you mean, mate. You are correct, but basically, we're in like a Riot Games territory here, where when Riot Games finally puts like the best like European player in the client for me to see, people go, "Wow, what a great idea!" It's like, how was that not an idea from day one? Like what? Like, wouldn't that be like the second thing you'd do after launching the LCS is put like fucking Doublelift's face up when he plays the game or something? So I agree. Yeah, of course that's good, but like. Why that? So put it this way, mate, I don't think they even started doing that until like maybe 2 years ago for normal tournaments. I think even for majors, I think it was only like 3 or 4 ago. They seemed like they were really slow to pick up even on that.
Yeah, like they're always bizarrely slow about these things. But another thing I think is good to move like people from the casual side of the game to more serious is retakes being in like a proper game mode now. Because the problem I had with the game...
Are those popular? I've never played them.
No idea.
I know people do
Yeah,
like them though. It seems like people enjoy them it seems like people
think
use
as
them
a
almost.
really casual, yes.
As far as I know, don't people use them kind of like a CSDM, like you do it for 5 minutes before you play a game or something?
Yeah, it's like a warm-up thing. But the problem the game always had was you couldn't move as a person starting out the game. It was difficult to move from like DMing to playing matchmaking because you don't know any of the angles.
Yes.
You don't know anything. So it's like, and there was no 5v5 unranked, and so having a mode like that, you actually learn some angles. You actually learn like using smokes and stuff rather than casual, which is just like a death ball running around the map. Like, so I think that can move people to the serious side of the game.
I mean, anything that's a bridge between like the most basic version of the casual game and something approaching pro play, I think we could all agree would be like. I'll give you an example of something I thought was very sad, which was, I know now it's going to be really obscure because I'm talking about something that I think was at the beginning of like 2017, but I very briefly worked with a company called Boomio a long time ago now, which was like a premium subscription service, which was launched by one of the guys who at the time was my agent and who actually was involved with setting up E-League for Turner TV. It comes from esports, so he wasn't like actually like a non-esports guy. And basically, one of the things that they had was it was going to be a service where they had like a whole load of pro players who were going to, like make videos you could buy and stuff. But then one of the things they had that was pretty baller was they had a feature, it was called Duels. And basically, it was a server where two of you drop in, and all it did is it would put you at different angles for a real pro match. Like an obvious one would be like a guy's on Mirage B site. There's a guy who's a CT and he's up in like the sort of palace area on the B site, and then I'm down at like the get right position on the corner, and it's like he's dropped looking at my area and I'm looking at him, and what the game would do is drop two of you into one of these spots on either end of it, obviously, and you know the other person's rough spot because you've been in these spots over and over again. You get dropped in one every 5 seconds or something, and what you do is you just take that duel against that player, and it was basically just a way of like doing what everyone really wants to do in practice, which is instead of playing like 5 pogs to get that particular fight 7 times or something, you just practice it over and over again. It was a pretty cool like warm-up concept because the actual scenarios you were being putting in were like real game situations, but obviously the service itself didn't live very long. I think it only lasted like, I'm going to say like 3 or 4 months or something. And then somehow the premise of the actual like server mode just seems to died completely, but it was actually a pretty cool mode. Like I remember even a bunch of like, I wouldn't say pros, but like people who were quite legit at the game even saying like, this isn't even bad to warm up on actually, especially if you're a beginner and like I say, you haven't played loads of matches.
Yeah, the Boomio training mode was one of those things that I feel like not only is it almost lost artifacts of a distant civilization somehow, because like you say, there's literally nobody even tried to copy it. It was also...
I don't think you can even get it for free, can you? Like I've never seen it again.
No, it's straight up not available. Maybe there's some obscure things that do it the same way now. I mean, the 1v1 arenas that they've built inside the actual warm-up sections for the official maps now for the Valve have done sort of resemble it. The problem is that those are complete new architecture just in the art style of whatever map you're playing on. So it'll be like a sandy one for Mirage or Dust 2 or whatever.
Yes.
So you're not really practicing the angles. It's not like they've taken a copy of B-Site and made 5 versions of it and then have like 5 1v1s happening the entire time or whatever, which is what you would naturally expect. Like, again, to your point earlier about we don't really need game devs as much as we need community people. Like this is a service that should probably have just been a game mode you queue into at the beginning of your warm-up method, and it's built into the game instead of you using that CS source community server UI to find some custom shit or, troll around for some external services that you have to pay a subscription fee for. Like, this is kind of whack for most people who are just have already bought into the assumptions that or the premises that already exist within the thinking of Counter-Strike. But I think it's ridiculous that we have to pay for a subscription service like Faceit or ESEA or in the past like Civo and stuff, where like that's your way of getting legitimate pickup game, action, not something in the actual game. The fact that you have to go outside of the game to me is really weird, and they are getting paid for it. Like it's a service that they're providing to the community, the Faceits of the world, the ESEA, but it's ridiculous that it's not just a built-in mode. And the fact that the expectations have sunken so low that anytime Valve does the tiniest little thing in the direction of whatever the case may be, like bridging the gap between professional and casual, or trying to add some features to the game that should have been there a long time ago. Like there's one part of the community, that very vocal minority, that just says this still isn't enough and they still haven't fixed basic issues with the game. And then the general take is, well, at least we're getting something. This is better than nothing. And as if that's something that you should be, focusing on. So I don't know. It's a bit of a dark dystopian take on the matter, but I just feel like Valve have squandered pretty much every opportunity that they could, and they're content to sit back and harvest data and get money, count their money from the skins, is what it feels like, just from somebody who's not really ever had contact with them. Like, I don't know how passionate they are about stuff related to Counter-Strike. It seems like it's always been a really small team, perpetually understaffed, perhaps.
Like, my problem with most of the Valve stuff is there's not really much of an incentive for them to do these things. I know to you or I, they might be like, what do, like, if you're not hardcore about like the religion of esport, who really gives a fuck? Like, to them, you just want more players. So my problem basically is most of the things in the game that keep Valve interested don't even touch esports. Like, I know they could obviously make skins be way more like sort of integrated. Like, obviously they should be like a fucking simple skin or so, like specialist ones. But even then, like, to them, Valve's logic would be like, why don't we just make a general skin that people like and then everyone buys it? So like, it's hard to argue with that. So my problem basically is, if I wanted to live in the world you're describing, I think it's fair that Valve gets something extra. So like, if let's say there was a mode where you can have this current mode is free mode, right? Whatever we currently have in CS, but there's a mode where you pick whatever amount it could be, $2.50 subscription, and you get access to all that stuff. You get the servers that are 128 tick. You get, some sort of a Faceit-like thing, or some sort of maybe like basic level free package on Faceit, or so, whatever it might be. Yep. You could bundle all this stuff together. The problem is, at the moment, I don't feel as though any of the incentives really line up for Valve to do things in esports, which isn't really an issue. They can do whatever they want. It's just that we only care about esports typically. So, like, all I would say is this, is as someone who's watched Counter-Strike for a long time, I wouldn't pin any of your hopes on the idea that, like, we just need X more people in the scene. Like, we don't need any more people. We don't, guys. We've got way more than we ever had at Counter-Strike. The real problem right now is you can't monetize any of those people, at least currently, with the current approaches. There's definitely approaches you can take. And so the problem is, what you're discovering is most of the businessmen in esports just fucking suck. And their logic is like, right, instead of fixing my business plan, what if I just made the input go 100x? It's like, that's not a way to fucking solve any problem. What are you talking about? Like, so my real issue is like, I feel like that's a discussion from 10 years ago. How do we grow the game, or what could Valve do? It's like, I don't think they really need to. If anything, we need to make use of what we've got now, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point as well. If you consider the idea that where we are in the CS ecosystem, like, this is a bit of an abstract takeaway, but we've had in Counter-Strike some of the most talented broadcasters, at least historically. Like, obviously, think back to the Henry and Sato days of casting, and literally, like, for my money anyway, de facto, the most technically proficient broadcasters in all of esports were those two guys in that duo. And the idea that they're in the same duo as well is like almost a 1 in a million kind of shot. And the fact that we had them, but we also had so many other competitive tier 1 caster pairs. We had like crazy good broadcasters for analyst desks. Like, that's a case where we don't need more. Like, maybe we can benefit from more. Maybe more TOs can exist with like high quality products if we have more. But if we already have like 3 pairs for casters and a great like analyst desk rotation, which we had in the past, and when someone could say, there's still a pretty competitive field of talent now, obviously. Sure. So like, it's not like it's completely gone away. We don't necessarily need to continue prioritizing growth in an environment where we're already not necessarily making the most use of what we have right now as far as the raw materials, so to speak. If we're not assembling those into the best quality products, then there's something wrong with the person who's assembling it or the method that they're using to assemble it, not the parts themselves. I think the parts are pretty good at this point.
Sure.
I always wished there was like a service I could pay for. Like, you saw that thing like what's it called? E-League. As an international fan, I didn't know how to pay to watch the proper broadcast.
I don't think you could, as far as I know.
Couldn't, but that's the thing. That was the most frustrating thing.
Sure.
But it was basically only Americans who could,
yes,
and people who had satellite TVs.
Yeah.
So I always wished that there was something that went from that idea, but it's a subscription service. And like,
you're talking about like a pay-per-view for esports broadcast?
Like, you think about like UFC Fight Pass or like NFL Game Pass, something like that, where you like UFC Fight Pass is something that is ridiculous in that you pay like $6, something stupid, and you've got like
value for money is insane, isn't it? Yeah.
And so you can just go back and watch everything. Whereas like I tried to go back and watch just like a bunch of big tournaments from when Counter-Strike started, and I got stuck on like the second one because it was like, oh, this this doesn't exist anymore. I can't find it.
I'm sure like the Twitch VOD or whatever probably just got wiped. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like
HLTV might have the demos, but most of the time it's going to be...
those demos didn't even work. Like,
Yeah, that's also
It's
part
like-
of the problem.
if I could pay money to just have access to all of Counter-Strike history, that'd
The
be
real problem is essentially like someone tried to do that with. That's basically what that company Snipe, which is the one that I actually have like stock in just from when I did some work with them. It's basically what they were trying to do, and basically, let me think. I think it was in 2017, I'm pretty sure, is when I went and did a couple of events with them where it was like me and Samler, then me and Lurpis, and there was the one that I'd Get Right as well. It was basically where like we were in Stockholm in a studio, and it's like we were like an alternate stream to whatever the stream was. It was usually like the final of a big tournament. And instead of being like, casters, like we just did like an analysis stream basically. And basically the premise with that company was their tech was exactly what you're describing. It was like, it was basically even, I believe the people who coded it were even people who actually before that had like worked on like NBA League Pass or something insane, like one of those really like high end streaming services where if people don't know, they're like 100 times better than Twitch. Like, the quality auto figures itself out without you refreshing it. Like you almost never get drops. Like the service is all really, and as you say, always has like a VOD archive, which for sports tends to be like, years and years and years of shit. So actually, like the longer it goes on, the more value your pass gets in that sense. Basically, what they wanted to do was they had the tech for that. It's just that at the moment, there's not a pay-per-view option. And then more importantly, aside from just collecting everyone else's VODs, at this point in time, like the content options are quite limited, which is why I was working with them, because the plan was hopefully they would get more tournaments to make this like a side thing. So like, ESL would promote that you could get this pass and you'd get like a side stream. And it also featured, because these are the people who later did ProView and League of Legends, it also featured like, full control. Like you could look at every camera angle. You could go to where like there was a timeline that showed where the kills took place. You could skip straight to that, or you could tell it to like make you a mini movie of like every kill by one player in the game or something. Like it had a lot of great features to it. The problem was, to get it on the esports side, you need to partner with the TOs, and then you also need to generate the content to put into it. Like one of the biggest problems in esports in general is that people want I know it sounds mad because it's not really the way business is done now, but generally those sorts of businesses, people almost never actually do their due diligence before they launch them. So they'll try and like launch with nothing in the content library. So the flaw is, in my opinion, if you launch a service like that, from day one, it needs to be amazing. So if it was in Counter-Strike, you'd need to have like the last 2 years worth of VODs and a bunch of extra side content and a bunch of series that you've begun. Because I think the premise is right there. Like I think there's a lot of people would be hungry to do something like that. It's just that it's not really something that I think scales. You almost have to like present it pretty good. And then if it's good enough, people will buy it. But it's going to be a decent like outlay initially. So unfortunately, that project didn't really go anywhere. Like in fact, the fact that it had success in League of Legends with a separate project kind of, I think, made them just go down that route instead of putting more time into CS. Because CS also has the downside that because Valve doesn't really do anything and you just don't work with Valve. Well, that sounds good in general if you're just running tournaments, but the bad part of that is Valve could just wake up tomorrow and just take your entire business from out under you. So it makes it a lot more tricky to do these sorts of things in Counter-Strike, even though in theory you don't imagine that happen. So, like, I agree. I think that premise would be like that's basically I would subscribe to something like that essentially, even if I was if it was, say it was one of the TOs I don't work with, I would pay for a service like that. So I think the potential is massive there. I actually think that's probably the next $1 million idea. It's just no one's executed it properly.
And then you also have the TOs who really don't like it when you have side projects on.
Yeah, they all want their
content.
cut, exactly. Yeah, and their logic. Sadly, it's one of the reasons why it took so many of them so long to figure out core streaming. Is at the end of the day, they don't give a fuck. Here's the real secret, right? When they brag about the numbers they had viewing their tournament, they don't actually think that the total number is what they want. If they had their choice, they'd take 70% of that number, but 100% of them all just on ESL stream, like the main Twitch channel. They don't give a fuck that Gowles or something has them. They'll add those numbers at the end to trick some guy in marketing, yeah. But unfortunately, they would rather they were all just on their channel. So unfortunately, even though to me, the second that things like core streaming became possible, it made sense you should just tell everyone. Like, if I'm doing Flashpoint and then like fucking, I don't know, Davey or Flom or something wants to core stream, it already helps me, mate. I was never going to make loads of money off the fucking just raw ads on mine anyway. So we may as well just pump the viewership up. But unfortunately, a lot of TOs, Basically, it's one of the reasons why the secondary Flashpoint, I'm going to make so many fucking videos, mate. Because you just, in every single scenario, it's so banal and mundane what holds back CS. As in, you'll get a scenario where it's like, right, well, this team wants to work with this TO. Cool, what's the problem then? TO's just asking for too much money. It's like, what? And then you go, right, this player wants to... It's the same every single fucking time. Every single time. The person chooses to make nothing, to make 100% of nothing, rather than like 70% of something else. That's it. Every time that's the choice. So essentially,
good.
they're all, it's just pure selfishness. But the maddest part is, it actually shows what shit businessmen they are. Because even a greedy businessman knows, like, I can't always just only be the one profiting in the short term, or no one will do business with me. Like, to make the big score, I have to, like, sometimes sacrifice in the short term. These guys don't get that, unfortunately. So, like, I mean, I guess in a way I could wrap a lot of this discussion up by just saying this. In the long run, it'll happen if esports gets big enough. But just because a more shrewd businessman will come in and just see all these opportunities, I think.
Seems pretty obvious, yeah. And on the subject of TOs as well, I had a bit of a follow-up question from something that you guys were talking about on By the Numbers a while back, was that Blast has the great, like, pretty much some of the strongest broadcasts in terms of quality, but the way that they handle any controversy and the way that they behave with their rule book and all this other stuff just reeks of, if not corruption, just like ridiculous incompetence to the point of it might as well be malicious. So I was curious about this sort of angle, because if you take this idea in an abstract sense, it's going to take a very long time, if ever, for like the viewership who are enjoying the Blast product to ever turn on them because of their ridiculous antics outside of the product and like sort of behind the scenes. And we've seen something like this happen again just with this BlizzCon thing that's been announced recently, where everybody's losing their mind over the latest and greatest remaster that they outsourced to another Asian company. And everybody's, you know, essentially completely forgetting all of the other things that they've done wrong. I was curious as if you've seen any change in this down the years, or if this is just continuing to happen, because we've kind of talked before on some of these episodes about, you know, game devs essentially phoning it in and somehow like coasting off of, specifically Blizzard and Riot, just coasting off of like reputation. I wasn't expecting to see that.
Like with when they partnered with Neom, we did see that one, like people pushing back instantly the moment they noticed this.
Right, yeah.
And it took them 14 days for like them to come back on it, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, but the resolution was still a positive one in terms of what people were, you know, essentially getting up in arms about. That was resolved eventually, even though it took a ridiculous amount of time and it was a crazy amount of silence. The resolution for the Vitality stream sniping thing was not positive. Like they done basically nothing, right? The resolution for like the ridiculous nature of how quickly they were to capitulate to the Astralis 7th man, 10 man, 1 million population of Denmark man roster that they've got going on there, where they just keep adding more and more people. And suddenly, oh, now we can do substitutes like the very next tournament that Astralis go into. Like all of the things that point to some sort of malfeasance there have essentially been swept under the rug. So yeah, the really egregious one of Neom, right? That was the one that they didn't get away with, but they've gotten away with everything else, it seems. So I'm curious as to if people here have had a different perspective on this.
They got like a day or two before it actually went off, because League of Legends absolutely launched it at the wrong, like the really bad timing on Twitter where everybody's active. So like they got the most flack for it at first, and then it was only Blast after.
I think people do get pushback sometimes more than you realize, just because people are no longer in the ecosystem. So like the example with Blizzard, like people who got pissed off at the way they did, say, World of Warcraft, just stopped playing World of Warcraft. And so you no longer hear their opinions because they're off doing something else. Like those, like the people who got pissed off at Overwatch don't watch Overwatch anymore, right? So sometimes you can have like all the feedback is positive, but that's just because the people who are giving feedback are like just self-selecting the people who still like what they're doing.
Yeah, I just don't feel like that kind of phenomenon has happened with Blast specifically, because obviously everybody, like if you look to any Reddit thread about, for example, and obviously Reddit is like a vocal minority anyway, but as using them as a bit of an example, if you look to like any of the ESL threads that have been up where people are saying like, you guys should basically do this like blast. Like, it just seems to me that the pulse of the community is very much focused on the product that they are receiving for free, and not, again, like the nature of which this product is being engineered. You know what I mean? Which, I mean, it makes sense. Like, it takes a little bit of time to go into that, but even the people who like the reaction to the coaching bans and the scandal that happened.
I don't think fans actually care about any of that shit, though.
Yeah.
It's like I said to Richard, the real problem he's had with some of these angles is even just saying this person stole or lied, like, that isn't enough. Like, there's got to be a sexy angle to this. There's got to be human drama, basically. So here's the difference. Like, I always said this, the real story was not I buy power through a meaningless game. That story never gets anywhere, mate. The real story was, now the people who Richard says through the game are lying and saying like, one of the two's lying. There's an interesting story, right? One of these two people has to be a liar. And in fact, whoever it is a scumbag as a result. Then, oh, what? And now someone cheated on their girlfriend, and that girl, like, that's the story that hooks people. So my problem basically is nobody who watches Counter-Strike sits there before they click Twitch and go, do I morally object to it? These people are about to show me this freak. No, they just click the fucking click. So I don't, unfortunately, I don't think they'll ever care about that.
Yeah.
And I think even worse than that is the reason why Blast seems the stupidest is because Blast is the only set of people who have zero leverage. Like, Flashpoint technically know that they can have a tournament with nobody else. They can just have their own teams playing it. ESL already has the scene on lock pretty much. They don't really have much, and nobody speaks against them because they're currently the ones who have it on lock. Blast are the ones that are just up shit's creek because all they have is the teams. They have the teams that they pay, and that's it. So as a result, they must keep those teams happy. Keeping the players happy is just a secondary consideration. So as long as the team is happy, it's really all that Blast cares about. So I don't really personally see it moving much beyond that. I would also say as well, even though on some level I agree with the premise of, like, you know, if you think what someone does is morally wrong, you shouldn't really like support them or try, like, you know, like benefit from what they do or whatever. The problem with that is, like, I can't really tell people to do that when the main reason people probably care about these games is that they avoided every real life situation where they could have boycotted brands that were doing evil shit, and so created this fucked world where our escape is to play video games. Like, I'm not really sure that, like, going into the video game and then boycotting everything was, like, probably where we should start with that. Like, I think there's probably bigger things we could boycott. So I don't think there'll ever be a comeuppance. Essentially, what people don't even realise about the Blast angle is, I don't even think the Blast blowback would have been enough. Like, the real reason the LEC had the blowback is because you put your own casters in the way of it. They're more popular than you are, and the casters turned against you, so the crowd was roused by the casters. Same in CSGO. If people like me, Richard, others are not the ones saying it, yeah, it'd have some push, but would it be as much? Because, like, if you think about it, we're bringing the sexy element there. It's like, wow, this person I know speaks out against Company X. Like, again, the drama is what will always draw people in my opinion. So it's actually why, in a bizarre way, you can almost use, like, drama for good if it's the right people and it's the right time, you know, even though a lot of people would assume that that's almost like an anachronism or something, you know.
The only time we actually, like, saw something of a blowback is when people or companies try to do something innovative for the first time, and it's like people not liking it.
Sure.
Like, that's the only time we actually, like, saw something like, oh no, you can't do this. I need my X-ray vision. Well, we did see that a lot when, like, Steel was observing in MLG and shit, which was absolutely phenomenal, to say the least. Like, the moments he picked were absolutely phenomenal, and people went, I need X-ray. Why you no X-ray? Like, what are you not getting? This is amazing.
Yeah, I think I'm in a really bizarre position because, put it this way, I actually don't want, like, TOs and Valve to listen to everyone's feedback, including mine, because I'm sure on some of the shit I talk about, how would I know? Like, I'll give you an example. Let's say we were talking about, pick whatever it might be, like movie making or something. Whoever made the movie probably knows 100 times more about movie making than me. So, like, even my feedback would almost need a second person who knows the two of us and would know what I'm not understanding, but trying to awkwardly explain to the guy who knows way more than me. So, like, I do like them generally to take feedback in. But even then, I do think a lot of the thing of, like, they don't listen to us is like, mate, a lot of us shouldn't be listened to, including me sometimes, you know. Sometimes we're all just talking. We're all just giving our opinions, aren't we?
Right.
There's a big difference between when you know you've got a good point and you're just giving your opinion.
And that's the other angle to the feedback threads that keep popping up from ESL as well that I'm kind of confused about, because on the CSGO subreddit, they'll have a bunch of outreach in that sense, and they've tried to be a little bit more active in social media for that particular example, but the product hasn't actually improved. So this is sort of...
I think they're just doing a Riot in that sense, then, mate. Like, one thing Riot learned a long, long time ago is if you just have a guy go in the thread, that's the feedback thread where people are complaining, and he clearly is like an official person.
Yeah.
He could say anything. Like, it's weird because if you notice, somehow online, I think it's the fact you're doing it in public or something, makes people be way nicer to obvious PR that's just telling you what you want to hear than they would be if it was like one-on-one over the phone. Like, you hear stories all the time about, the poor bastard who works like customer service where, they're trying to say everything right. Like, well, sorry, sir, I can have a technician come out. And then the guy's just chewing them up, like, you fucking idiot. But bizarrely, when you do the exact same thing in public, everyone just goes, wow, what the hell? Now I love ESL, like unironic meme like that, like, but they don't even know they're doing it as a meme. Like, that's a real response.
Phone, like chewing you out.
No, they would be if at the same time, they take a breath and turn away. Right, who's got some actual game-related topics here? Because I feel like we might lose people. The first hour was mainly the industry stuff. So have we got anything related to the game here? Andrew, have you got something, mate? You usually got some angle.
Okay, so it's not like team related, but it is. So the thing that I'll change what I was going to say because to make it more grounded with. So the big discussion constantly that I feel like we're cursed to have forever is the greatest of all time discussions, which personally I actually get annoyed by because I feel like you lose like a lot of nuance. So like, the current thing in tennis where apparently winning more majors just makes you the greatest of all time, even though the people in the past were versing different opponents with different rackets on different
of course.
courts. Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, what? So Roger Federer gets an advantage because Dimitrov was shit. Like, I don't see why that should hurt Rod Laver, but whatever. And I've seen like, Richard had a conniption recently over people calling Aaron Rodgers the greatest of all time. And so I was wanting to try and like, when we talk about greatest of all time, what are we actually answering? Because I feel like the Aaron Rodgers example would be like, who's the most talented player of all time or who's the most skilled player of all time? Whereas say like the Tom Brady one would be who's converted their talent into like performances on the big stage.
Sure.
Or who's cheated more?
That's also a side there. But like, so the example would be like simple is Aaron Rodgers.
Just simple his statistics. Like, if you go through the history of Counter-Strike, I've never seen anybody play like that and put up these numbers.
Sure.
Oh yeah, but that's also this thing is when you look at Aaron Rodgers, he's crazy, right? And so the thing if you're talking about like who's the greatest of all time, what's like the framework of putting this in? And so I was wondering like what your guys' answer of the best of all time would be if it was like you're selecting a team, and the other four players are exactly the same like skill level depending on what style you want to play, whatever. And you have one star player to choose for the next like 5 years. Which star player wins you the most like majors and championships and whatnot? Because I feel like putting like a real kind of like who do you think would actually win the most rather than
I feel that is so difficult to do in Counter-Strike because the fact is maps change, we get rotations, right? And then also players, their form drops off or like comes on. We have seen periods where people are just absolutely on fire and then they go to the dumpster like 4 or 5 months later. And then they never recover from it. So that's just in Counter-Strike. I don't see how you can do that like consistently except for like over a long period of time. Like if you do that on a scale of like 6 months every year, like twice, you can do that for that period of time, but I don't think you can do that over like long term.
If you can select simple or like device from any point in their career and you get them for the next 5 years, or you can say Ziwu or anyone, right? You can get Riot or whoever you want. Who do you think wins the most championships? Because it's like if you put like one of the things that interesting out of the Apex.
How young is he? How explosive is he? How long has he been playing Counter-Strike? How long has he had like proper teams to play in? All those kind of things like come into the equation for me.
You could choose Simple. Say I get Simple from 2016 to the next, like he's that level of Simple to the next 5 years versus say Device from 2016 to the next 5 years. Who do you think wins the most championships on an equal team?
Well, the problem is the equal team.
Sorry, you go.
No, go for it.
No, I was just gonna say, like, the problem is like when you're trying to compare two players from you're trying to compare like eras or like trying to assess like if they would do well in a different era, essentially, right? So it's not like it probably is subject to like your own personal criteria of like if you're comparing Device to Ziwu, right? Ziwu. Device was like he had to undergo his development from like when he was choking during his times in TSM and before in Dignitas, and then like going through that development now in like from like 2017 was when he actually like rose in stock to be like to raise his level, whereas Ziwu, probably like had like he didn't have the experience of the past, so he basically gained experience through watching the pros that developed, and then like probably had natural talent as well to like do well. So yeah, it's hard to say.
Put it this way, I'll take everything you all just said and like reframe it. So basically what Andrew's asking, which is actually probably the way more interesting question than who is the best player of all time or who is the greatest or whatever, is like, what are you searching for when you even ask that question? So are you asking who was the best player at winning with the assumption built into it that the championships mean you were the best at winning, which means you were the best player, which is at the moment what everyone else does. Like they take all those things I just said there and they don't have any of those square brackets. They just take it as, right, Tom Brady won the most. He's a quarterback, therefore he's the best. That's it. In fact, their assumption literally is that there is an extremely strong correlation between being the best player and winning. Even though they're talking about a game that a team has 53 players. So the other way you can do it is, like Andrew's way was more like, what about if we take the team component out of it? So everyone has in this scenario, we could just say they're all just clones of identical skill who can understand your language, equal experience. And we just put each of these players out there on a different team each. Who would do the best in the end? Now, the reason why that's actually quite an interesting question is because if you actually do that question with any sport, including the NFL, it becomes a way more interesting discussion. Like the obvious example would be this. If I had to go back in time now and pick a quarterback to start an NFL franchise with, I wouldn't pick Tom Brady. Because if I actually look at Tom Brady's career, I think that's got to be one of the tiny, tiny fraction in which he would ever win that many Super Bowls. And look how many other things had to happen. His team, like the fact that they had a very unique business strategy, his coaches almost some like ridiculous ability to pick people who aren't like massive free agents to when to sign them, when to get rid of them. Like if you actually were at the beginning of like a magical NFL like franchise, I think most people would probably pick like Aaron Rodgers or Peyton Manning or something like that. They just seem like the obvious, because these guys just like the eye test just tells you from day one, they're really good. So basically it's called a counterfactual. You just imagine if a certain thing had gone differently, what it would be like. I like the other one, which is one I'm actually going to introduce soon in some of my own content, because it's one of the areas where in the Ziwu Simple argument, I find it actually quite boring. In my opinion, you either debate the eye test. So you watch Sim play and then you watch Simple play, and then you decide which you think is the better of the two. The problem with that is people aren't very elegant at describing what they're thinking about when they see the eye test. So the other angle I would do is this. Let's imagine we made a team that was a CIS version of what Ziwu has. So we make Simple a team of all these old vets and then one or two young guys. And then we see, how we speculate how they would do. Or we go the other way. We say, what if Ziwu had a Simple type team where he has a couple of people who have like really high skill, kind of a bit flawed team structure, lack of experience. How would he do? And that's a more interesting discussion to me, unless you're just going to do the straight up comparison. And even then, you've got to be able to go pretty deep sort of in explaining, what you're perceiving. Because I actually do find that to be a pretty boring discussion. You'll notice, by the way, The people who are the least interested to have a GOAT discussion with are the people who decided there's only one good answer.
It's true.
You know?
There isn't, by the way. It's not always one.
There's not in any game as far as I can tell, you know.
Basically, you have to have someone who's got, like, such absurd stats, and they happened really early on. So they also become like a mythic kind of figure. So, like, only Duncan might know who this is, but, like, Don Bradman in cricket, who his numbers are so bananas that people just went, oh, yeah, he's the best, and never discussed who was the greatest after that. But if you've ever got any, like, kind of leeway, people will always have an angle. Because it is the thing of, like, for instance, like, you know, like I said that last time about how Simple hasn't performed in the 2 finals he was in. I rate Majors higher than other people. Like, I think Lurpus has, like, been like, Majors, whatever. We've got big other tournaments. Like, I rate them highly, so I rate those performances as being important.
Sure.
But that's a personal thing, right? Like, because I rate just like, the most people choke in Majors, therefore players seem to think they're important.
True.
That's, you know, other people will go, hey, but winning like 3 other tournaments of the year and then not winning the major is better. And maybe they're right. I don't know.
Yeah, there's definitely an argument to be made there. And I remember first seeing some people make this argument, but that's another tough part about, like, engaging in the discourse so that you can try to figure out who believes what and, like, maybe what percentage, roughly speaking, have this view versus, like, what's the dominant view of the era or whatever. So when Team Liquid were making that miraculous summer run in 2019 and they eventually didn't cement the era, the question of whether or not they would have an era was on the card. Some people were saying even if they won the major, they might not have an era. Like, some people were kind of doubters or whatever. Then you got people who wanted to argue for them being, like, the best in the world because they won the Intel Grand Slam in record time. And they, like, essentially the assumption was that they won it so fast that Intel changed the rules about the sponsorship or whatever. I don't know to what extent that's real, but it was a funny timing since they did change the rules immediately after that. And the fact that they did do that, and in many ways that is more impressive than winning one tournament, which happens to be called the major, is, like, that's something to be considered. But a lot of the people who were making the arguments in favor of Team Liquid there were making the arguments against teams in the past who had won a lot of tournaments but not won the majors. And it's interesting to see the evolution of those kinds of arguments anyway, because you don't know if you're engaging with someone who actually believes that, for example, Simple or Zywoo are the greatest of all time or are the top 1 player of 2020 or whatever the case may be, because they have a well-founded reason and they've thought of it and they've come to the conclusion after looking at opposition arguments, or if they just think that because they're a fan of that player more than the other player, or they hate the other player more than they hate the other player. You know, like, it's so difficult to get a read on whether or not somebody's arguing from good faith in that sense when you're talking about that, which is why I think it is better to just ask more interesting questions where, in order to even start answering the question, you have to kind of give away the reasoning that you have for your beliefs. And you can't, it's so easy to sidestep that whole side of the argumentation if you're able to say, oh, he's the greatest of all time just because of look at his accomplishments, you know? So it's a lot easier to hide whether or not you've actually thought about it.
As soon as anyone, by the way, ever says apropos of absolutely nothing, like, suck his dick more, like, just leave that conversation immediately.
Yeah.
Like there's no intellectual thinker going like, oh, yes, the way I view Trotsky's communism compared to Lenin, suck Lenin's dick more, dear. Like, you just don't need to be in that. Like, that's a sign of, like, someone who's not arguing in good faith, you know? Like, the people, the NFL example is a great one, Andrew, because essentially, if people don't know, it goes like this. Everyone who's like a midwit goes, there's not even a discussion. And if there is, you must hate Tom Brady. It's like, right, well, you know, mate, like, I feel like I'd have to get into so much just to know your childhood before we can even get to this conversation. I don't think it'd be worth either of our time. So what I would say is this, like, Andrew, who is your GOAT in CS then, based on what you just said? Like, who do you have as the GOAT? Goldzera?
No, I have Device because I think, like, the fact that he's shown up in so many finals, when I went back and looked at, like, the really legendary players, I was surprised at how many of them failed in the major final. Like,
It's the majority.
it wasn't. Yeah, it's not it's not just like, oh,
There's not actually a very strong correlation between being the best player and performing in the major final, as far as I can tell.
yeah. And so that's one of the things where it's like, Device is kind of like the only one who's been there regularly. That's also the problem with these kind of discussions.
There's not a much
where,
sample size for the other show, yeah.
Yeah, like Shocks hasn't been in that many finals, right? So
No, he's been in one, exactly, yeah.
yeah, and so it's like, oh, well, he never got a chance to be like Device and be like, oh no, I just failed once.
Yeah, basically, we don't know if, his fourth final is when he goes super ham and, is the MVP, etc. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so that's one of the things like I find difficult about, say, Simple right now, is that I say, well, I don't think he can be the greatest of all time if he's failed in the major final 2 times. But then what if he just keeps on going off on this form and never reaches another final? Then like his team is holding him back in a personal award, which doesn't seem right. But then the major final does need to be taken into account. So it's kind of like how much do you weight something when maybe it's not even their fault that they ever get to compete? Which, like, I guess like the Nico 2016 discussion, like, do you hold it against Nico in the personal who's the best of 2016 just because his team was rubbish and Coldzera was on a great team?
I mean, another problem I have, though, mate, is that people go the other way. Like, this is another thing. I've brought this point up many times, and we'll make it very briefly. One of the real reasons why people just 24/7 think they're dunking on me is because I'm too fair when I discuss stuff. Like, if I want to just attack the other person's points all day, I'll just win every argument, mate, whether I make good points or not, because it'll just be framed that way. I find that very boring. So, like, I'll give you an example, right? The reason why, to me, I made the original premise that, like, Device must be the GOAT is exactly based on what you're saying, which is everyone I know who comes from the sports world, that's it, case closed. He's got the MVPs of the finals, he's won the majors, his competition usually don't even have a major, right? The reason why I don't make that argument is because when I watch Device day to day with the eye test, it doesn't get there for me. Now, that's not saying he can't be your GOAT. If you want to go by accomplishments, he almost certainly has to be. I mean, there's not very, the category's basically like him, Coldzera, and then maybe people who had a crossover in 1.6 as well. Like, that's basically it in terms of competition. So one of the problems I have with that discussion in normal sports is that people themselves have completely arbitrary standards. Like, for example, if your player, could be Tom Brady in this case, wins the Super Bowl, he must be the best, right? Well, then my logic would be, well, why doesn't the eye test tell me that in every regular season game? Like, and don't ever tell me, he's chilling for the play. Like, no one's doing that, by the way. That's a myth.
No
like,
one
that
chills.
Yeah, nobody saves strats for the major, as it were. Like, that doesn't happen. Like, it's one of the reasons why actually it became that controversial topic that in basketball coaches were sitting players to save energy, because in general, top players just play, mate. They try and win every game. Maybe mentally you're not as focused on the last game of the season when you've already made the playoffs and the other team doesn't. Yeah, you don't go like 100%, but like you still try to win that game. So my problem is basically, as far as I can tell, bearing in mind, I'll use the Tom Brady example for you. Bearing in mind, every single Super Bowl he won, with the exception of the last one, was won on like a game-winning drive or like field goal or something. Well, then in your world, and I'm specifically telling this to you just because you're here in front of me, obviously I'm not saying like as a singling you out, but put it this way, if in your world Adam Vinatieri just kicks those field goals wide of the field goal, or Tom Brady, his receiver drops the same pass he throws, that would have been the touch. If all those, like basically if I make like 8 players in history different, is he just somehow half as good a player in NFL history? Because by your metrics, he would be essentially, right, if he just loses half the rings.
I don't care who wins the final, to be honest. Like, it's just who shows up. That's
right. That's fair. Okay.
Like, I don't, like, if Device had lost all 4 finals,
right,
I would
see
still
what you mean.
have
Yes.
him as the GOAT, because
that's a lot more reasonable.
He was there 3 times. Like, Simple doesn't have to win a final for him to actually take that over.
It's just the fact he shit the bed in him. Right. I see what you mean.
Yeah, he has to actually be in the final as a force. You can't have Edward above you. Like, that's just not.
That's
like,
actually
a good
point.
So that's the only thing I care about, is just
fair enough.
Go up.
That's a fair point,
And by the way, funnily enough, that actually, if people don't know, that actually would massively count against you in the HLTV like MVP award, unless they changed it. Because famously, I remember them saying this was the reason why Kirby won it over Device the first time around, is they didn't count like the performances you had in maps you lost as highly as if you won the map.
Correct.
Which the reason why I bring this up is it's exactly pertinent to what Andrew's saying, is it implies that like I mean, the obvious example would be that Simple game against Ents at Katowice 2019. The implication is Simple wasn't the best player in that map because he lost the map. You know, like, I mean, I pick that example because I would just beg his belief to imagine anyone else was better than him.
He has double everybody's kills. And
but their logic is...
half the depths of everybody, and he's still not the best player in the map? Oh, okay.
Yep, but that's the problem. The logic is, whoever it was, in this case, it might even have been Edward back then, Edward doing a misstep earlier in like the, 27th round that cost him a round, that means Simple... If he doesn't make the misstep, Simple's the best. If he does, then Simple isn't the best. Like, my problem with that is, like, it's just, there's something wrong with that logic. Like, it breaks down in a way, you know. Yeah, I'm with you, Andrew. I think it should just go being as it's a team game. It should just go on, individual performance. And then you let the chips fall where they may in terms of the win or the loss, you know.
Like, it's always a difficult discussion because you don't know the team aspects that everyone does. So one of the things I thought was really interesting about the Apex, was it Ligia show, whatever that thing's called.
Strapbook.
Him talking about the fact that they kind of directed Ziwu in his kind of playbook he had. It wasn't Ziwu doing that on his own accord. And so that's like, well, that sounds like, now, I don't know where he's at in his development right now, but it seems like then 2019, he wasn't the best individual player because if he was put onto another team, he wouldn't be performing in the same way that, like, Simple and Device are far more developed in their careers. So it's like, not an entirely fair comparison. But at this point in their careers, Simple and Device do have a lot more, like, they can read the game better than he could in 2019.
Oh, it's a very good point. Ironically, only coming from Ziwu's in-game leader, actually against Ziwu being the best player out of the three. Because if you think about it, first of all, in that scenario, we must compare them because it's just who's the best right now. But yeah, your point's a very apt one, which is, as far as I can tell, both Alex and Apex now have gone pretty much out of their way, by the way, and the way teammates usually don't, to imply, like, maybe don't go too crazy just about the guy doing the kills because we're helping somewhere. Now, I'll tell you right now, there's not a person in this world who's going to come out in Na'Vi and go, it's actually me who told Simple to just rotate over there on Nuke. Like, and nobody imagines they do. Similarly, I imagine Device has a lot of leeway as to what he does in Astralis, and they kind of just, they do their shit and they just figure out they'll hook up at some point in the round. Like, that's a pretty good argument against them in the best, yeah. Because, but the problem with that, obviously, as you say, first of all, we have to trust that they're telling the truth. And secondly, if they don't tell us that, we have no way to ever guess that, can we? Except for the fact that, like, maybe... I mean, put it this way, I always found it a little bit suspicious that, like, the guy who's not just the best, but he's, like, perfect, is on, like, an insanely experienced team from the beginning. Like, that just... It could be a coincidence, but I would imagine that's playing into it in some way. My problem is just this. Especially, like, the first 6 months or so he was in that team, the others played so fucking bad that, like, I did want to make a lot about the fact that, like, no, this guy is doing shit. Like, it doesn't matter how you set someone up. No one will do the things he's doing. So I almost feel like people went too far the other way on that one. And that they were like, it's only him and the others are all this shit, Whereas, like, as I always said, he was never in, like, an Eco mouse spot scenario. Like, you can't, it's night and day comparing those. Like, you can say NBK doesn't frag well, but that guy's experience is unbelievable. Difference is, like, in the comparative example, that would be like fucking Spiddy or something in mouse spots when Nico was there. So, like, but that guy's not adding anything. He's doing very basic stuff.
Who would have thought, though, that Dennis and Spiddy are more relevant than, like, Swedish Dennis in 2021?
Oh, Lord.
What do you mean? Swedish Dennis is on Apex. He's playing.
Sadly, I actually do think he's another player that could have been very good again, because based on what I know about him, he's another guy where I think it's based on, like, here's the problem these pros have. They do it to themselves because they will never admit, usually even privately, to teammates like, yeah, I'm just not playing at the moment. He'll just wait until it gets bad before they admit that. It means that we all, like, for example, the reason no one wants to pick Guardian up right now is because they think when he played in Na'Vi last, that was just his best. He couldn't have done any more. So it doesn't matter how many times he tells me privately, oh, no, I wasn't playing much, now I'm motivated. Like, no one gives a fuck, mate. They just assume you were playing your best. They think you're shit now. So no one's going to gamble on you. But I actually think, just like I think Guardian, if he, again, I have to assume he's telling the truth, otherwise it doesn't work. If he actually puts in the time, I would bet Guardian comes back to being pretty good. Maybe not his best, but I could see him being a top 10 AWPer in the world again. Similar with Dennis, actually. Dennis, as far as I can tell, mechanically, was always a fucking mad skilled player. But his problem is, I think he just phoned in that last period he was on NIP. I don't think he really ever wanted to be in that NIP team. I think it was just nowhere left to go. Definitely didn't want to be the IGL, which is why, like, put that onto Lecro afterwards. Like, I think basically that was like a terrible team for him to give a fuck about the game. So I actually think if the right person had picked him up and he's putting in the hours, he probably could have been mega good again. It's just unfortunately like that. I think that some of those players, it's like you've got to have the right person believe in you at that time, or you'll never get the pickup again. Like you've seen some of these players, like Fallen just gets a million fucking chances apparently, but some of the other people who are like, it's one of the few areas where sometimes I wish I was a GM because I wouldn't even have to complain. I would just pick these players up and I would just be the one who benefits from it.
Yeah, Dennis is in a weird spot where, having casted him at his upset over Forza in ESEA Premier, he was in a situation where he basically had to pistol win so many different times in order to, like, they didn't even win the majority of their pistols necessarily, but he was the one who was putting up the numbers in a lot of those, which is like rolling back the years to when he earned his reputation as the pistol god in the first place. But it seems like the best that he could do on that Apex roster, being as it's literally filled with people who, like, this Kriya's from Flashpoint, Flashpoint Genji, who moved over there after his stand-in stint with them. And that's pretty much the only other notable player. Like the others are like Freddy Frog, Relaxa, like people who you may have heard of them, but they're deep.
They're not bad, but they're not top tier material.
Yeah, they're like, they're in that tier 2, tier 3 area, right? And they're generally not going to be moving up in the world. So, being as Dennis is the most experienced of that roster, the best that he can probably do is just like basically just strut his stuff for the entirety of the league and then hope that somebody picks him up at a higher position. Because sure, they can upset Forza, but I mean, how often is that going to happen?
That's also, unfortunately, what usually fucks these people. It's the reason why I always say, like, there's almost no point gambling on someone who's trying to do an actual comeback to the game when they've quit. Because, like, whatever reason made you quit, I mean, if anything, it's only going to be stronger now, isn't it? Like, it's not going to be less now. So, similarly, Matt, one of the problems I think people like Guardian and Dennis have is if they really wanted to make it back, right, here's what you do. You don't tell anyone. You just go and you start playing in a team and you fucking frag out and then people pick you up. But what they want to do, really, if they were honest, is they just want to skip all the time they weren't playing at Tier 1, and Guardian wants tomorrow to be in FaZe Clan, He doesn't want to go and play for Apex now and work his... No, of course not. So the real problem is they don't seem to get it. It's true, some of them, believe it or not, if you drop them in a top team, kind of like when Glaive just got to, like, skip the fucking waiting queue and just go and be an IGL of Astralis, if you put certain players in the right team, it might be amazing immediately and activate them. But my problem is, if you won't put in the yards to get to the point where that's an easier decision, why would I gamble on you, I have to really believe you're going to make it there. And the fact that you won't put in the hours at the semi-pro, that's my problem with a lot of those players. Like, that's why I tell a lot of them, you just won't ever make it back, mate.
It's like, in a company structure, you have to work your way up, not just, like, get picked out of school and be dropped in, like, at a top spot, right?
Exactly.
Unless
it's actually one of those things, by the way, that ties in with all that the whole discussion about unpaid interns.
Yes.
Because you could see from everyone discussing that who'd actually had a real career and who was just a fucking idiot on the internet. Because what they don't get is this as well. You could have the highest level of theoretical knowledge in a subject, and if you join the company Jerkies is talking about now, the reason I'm going to make you the T-boy for the first week is just to find out basic things like, can you even do what you're told to do? Do you turn up on time? Do you talk back? Do you seem reliable? But I'm not just going to drop you in like the most straight fire project in the company and just go, yeah, have at it. Like, yeah, there's other skills that people have to sort of, build up that have nothing to do with going to school, isn't there? So yeah, I think it's kind of similar.
I do have a question for Andrew, like, whilst just an extension on his question about GOAT players.
Yeah, go for it.
Because, like, he's talking about the fact that he doesn't really, like, you care that much about majors, right, Andrew? Because, like, you want to see, like, people, like, who are the best players win the major. So, by extension, like, someone like Karrigan, we can definitely say that, like, he's probably the best IGL that's never won a major, but we want to give him the chance unless he retires now and won't win the major, right? But, like, what's your, like, who do you rate as your favorite IGL that would have not won a major that is, like he's probably the most successful? Like, you can still be, like, an IGL player that's not, like, a top tier and, like, win a shit ton of tournaments like Karrigan has, be rated highly, and, like, maybe, like, someone would just attack him only on the major angle, right? And not, like, another, like, way of, like, assessing how good he is as a leader, right?
I would,
so, like,
I'd put, like, him as my second, maybe. Like, I haven't watched a lot of Pronax, to be honest. Like, watched, so like I can't say whether I rate him higher than other people do, but I would rate Carrigan very highly because like he's been winning championships for I think like the longest time out of any active IGL at this point. So his longevity is impressive enough that I think he like kind of goes above some people who have won majors to me because, well, they stopped being able to play. Like this
he's
guy's been
won
around
tier
for-
1 tournaments at various points in his career with like pretty much every team that he's been on, or at least the
Yeah.
last couple,
Yeah.
right? So
He's
like that's
around
the
before
thing.
them and he's around after them. So it's like
Yeah.
insanely impressive. So that kind of goes away. Oh, some guy won like 2 majors, whatever. This guy's around when you retired. So
I've got a question for you though, actually, Andrew, which is an interesting one, like philosophically from where you're coming from. Because even though you're like your initial premise, I do accept because it's like an obvious initial observation to make, which is that even some of the greatest players ever, you put them in the final of a major, and guess what? Pressure can get to them as well. They're still just human. Like they might just have a shit game, right? The problem I have is this. Even though in theory, and this is why I think a lot of people focus so much, not just on the championship even, it's who you play in the final round. Their logic goes like this. Because to them, it's another filter that's like filtering out most players. So we get into a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller subset. My problem is this, isn't there like a massive side angle that doesn't work? Which is, listen, if we contrast simple, shocks, get right, fucking device, Zero. I mean, Zero was never in a major final, but you know, when they were at the end of their careers, if we contrast all these guys in major finals, right, and we pick the one that won the most and played the best and go, right, you made it through. It's also a common trend that you will nearly always in every final get one player who wasn't a great player who will just overperform. You get the premise?
yeah,
So the problem I have is this. If we've taken it that being the guy who performs in the final was like the ultimate test, doesn't essentially, like by that logic, isn't like Wawrinka a better player than Andy Murray for most of his career?
So I would put it as I want to see to be the greatest player to me, you have to have overcome that hurdle.
Okay.
So like, yeah, like being, and I guess it is like, because I do follow tennis so closely, I've seen so many people who were incredible at like Indian Wells.
Just one certain stop or something. Yes. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, like any 1,000 event. Like
Yes.
Andy Murray, that's why he was called in one of the big 4. Because in
Yes.
the 1,000s, he would beat all these guys.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But then when it came to the majors, he only won 3. That's the same as Stan. Like,
Yes.
and so as soon as he stopped playing, basically, he was immediately dropped from like the big 4 down to the big 3. Because it's like, oh, okay, well, if you're not going to win like future majors, then yeah, you aren't one of these guys. Like, so I want to see like the Peyton Manning thing people always said was, well, he does so well in the regular season that he's going to put you in the position to win the Super Bowl more often than other quarterbacks. And that's true. I just want, if you're the greatest of all time, you to have done both, in that you're not just a regular season player and you're not just like Flacco, who was incredible in the playoffs. I want someone who's able to get you to the final and then get you over the line as well. And so that's kind of, but there is like the thing of saying like Carrigan's won so many other things that I put him above people who've won majors, because it's like, look, it's not just like majors is the only metric.
Okay. I mean, that does make sense, because if people aren't tracking, like even though it wasn't his era, I mean, logically Happy won 2 majors, Carrigan's won 0, but I think a lot of people wouldn't have any problem putting Carrigan higher than Happy, you know?
Absolutely.
That's also one of the areas that I find weird about all those discussions, though. The difference is, Andrew, like me and you maybe do sit down at the beginning and define our terms. Everyone else just starts going, and it's not until they disagree they maybe find out what they were even disagreeing about, you know? So, like, I also think personally, if you ever do any kinds of these scenarios, the only way you can ever be honest with yourself is if you decide your criteria before you make your list. It's what I basically did not so long ago. It was like, it was about a year ago, I think. before I stopped, no, maybe more than that, because I don't think I worked with them that. Whenever I was working with Desertor still, I did a list for them that was like the greatest like Western League of Legends player, and I did exactly that. I figured out all my criteria to the nth degree before I made the list, and it did mean that as a result, like if I was doing it off the top of my head, the guy who's maybe fourth actually ended up being seventh instead of fourth, because when I contrasted every aspect of how I would figure it out to be consistent, I had to put him seventh instead of fourth,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like most people, they only actually figure out the criteria after the fact, when they start arguing about it, basically. So in reality, all they're really saying is, who do you just like the best? Which is fine. It's also the reason, by the way, why I actually think the discussion's way more interesting if you don't have to say they're the greatest. Like, what someone should really say if they want... Here's how you have an NFL discussion with no disagreement, Andrew. You just say, I personally think Aaron Rodgers is the most skilled quarterback ever. Tom Brady seems to be the most clutch at winning in championships. Peyton Manning seemed to be the best generally over the regular season. You go like that. At that point in time, you can just have a really interesting discussion between how they contrast, whether they're the same. Like, if you just remove those contexts, you just say, well, I think A is the best. B is the best. Like, C, what about C? Like,
yeah,
probably not going to get anywhere interesting with that, I think.
Also, the fact that you mentioned Happy and Kerrigan is nice because you can contrast them. How many successful teams has Happy had? 2?
Yep.
And how many successful teams has Kerrigan had? Yeah, exactly. Every team he joined has gone to improve and, gone on to get near championships or win them. So that's just easy pickings.
Sure.
Most people seem to determine their criteria by the argument they're having now. And so, the NFL discussion, which always tilted me, was when so Andy Dalton, they would say, I only value playoff wins. So if he hasn't got a playoff win, he doesn't.
Of course, yes.
I hate those kind of people.
So, but then someone would ask them, well, what do you think about Tim Tebow? Because the only thing you care about is playoff wins. And they'd go, that guy shouldn't have been able to play football.
Yes.
What a jerk. It's like, wait, but you just said only playoff wins matter. He beat a really legit Steelers team.
Yes.
Surely by your logic, he's really good. Be like, no. I don't like Tim Tebow and I don't like Andy Dalton, and I'll change the rules of the discussion in order to... You're
basically summarising almost every tweet I do that gets featured on the CSGO subreddit, where I'm nearly always making a case like yours. I'll give you an example. Everyone always tells me on that subreddit that I think Device is the greatest player of all time. It's news to me because I've never said that at any point on any of my shows. But the point is, when I make a tweet like that, it's exactly what you're pointing about. It's a bit like, I don't know if you ever see it in the self-improvement community. They love to do these tweets where you'll do a tweet and it'll be like some super provocative statement like, a woman will only listen to a man who she trusts knows better than her. Right? I'm just giving it mad, super hot take there. And then what they always say afterwards is they say, this tweet has nothing to do with women. Because what they're trying to make the point of is I'm using that as a framing premise, but it's actually more about, I don't know, in this case, maybe social relations or how we view people based on, whether we respect them or not, whatever the angle is. It's like that. What I try to do basically is just point out that you have to be consistent with your reasoning. 99% of the tweets I've ever made about those HLTV guys is that they just do exactly that all the time. They just sit down and go, right, what would be the coolest if it was real? Let's just say that's what it is then. And it's if you're the guys given MVP awards and stuff, don't fucking change the criteria between MVP awards. Don't change the criteria for, if I get into your list in 2016, it's different criteria in 2020, but then you want to contrast the two side by side and not give anyone context that you changed it. In my opinion, that's intellectually bankrupt if you do that, We don't have to agree, but you have to have consistent criteria. And if you don't, you'll notice this is one of the areas you'll find out who's legit in esports. The people who can actually admit that, I've changed my mind on that. The ones who can't and have to pretend to be right forever, those people are a train wreck, mate.
You can change your criteria over the years if you learn more about things, obviously.
Ideally, you would, I'd assume, as time goes on. Yeah, of course.
You start to value different things. Yeah, different
exactly.
I've told this story many, many times in the past, but just consider this in the context that the same human being who took this approach later in 2017, 6 years later, is now marking you down if you perform well in a lost match, right? There was a tournament. It was ESWC 2011. And this was one of the last major, it was the last major in ESWC in 1.6, right? And it was won by SK Gaming, which was Get Right, Forrest, Roban, those guys, right? And even though the eye test was like, right, well, Get Right's obviously the MVP because SK just won the tournament. He not only carried, but he was even like beasting in the final, right? He didn't win the MVP. Off the top of my head, I believe fucking Carrigan won the MVP because his stats were good. And when his team got to the third place game, he was playing for Mouse Spots. They played against Neo and Taz's Polish team, who at that point in time like had already won something like 6 majors. So once they make the semis and don't win the semi, they could give a flying fuck. They couldn't give a flying fuck less about the third place game. But because in the third place game, a completely meaningless runoff game just for prize money, Carrigan just fragged out. The Peter guy from HLTV just gave Carrigan the MVP for the whole tournament.
Yeah, because compared to their reasoning, there was like a certain stat which was like percentages, and even though Get Right had a higher stat in that one, it wasn't enough for them to give it to him because Kerrigan was close enough.
So I mean, even though I would listen, if we go by what Jerky just said, like I would think that's great. Yes, I hope you would move on from counting like a meaningless game to change your criteria. But the problem is, at no point in the time, as far as I can tell, did they ever just say what they changed?
Which is bizarre. They just change it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a black box
like
with
you would,
no way to
like,
know.
A normal person would explain why he's changing something or adding values to something, right? No, just change it. Go. Like, what? We don't know it's changed. Why?
Yeah.
Well, that's what tilts me the most about when people are saying, so-and-so is the best player or the top 5 team or whatever. Like, there was a recent talk show where somebody was pushing back on the idea of certain teams being legitimized as like top 4 or top 5 or whatever the case may be. And the counter argument that they received was, but they literally are. Check HLTV. It's like, come on.
Oh my God. No.
Surely you've got something else.
That is the secret though to why people love that site though, because it really is to them. It isn't in reality. They don't know it's a guy from Serbia and a guy from Czech Republic and a guy from fuck knows where. They think it's like a fucking supercomputer. They think it's HAL 9000 out of 2001 that's just going to make all the decisions for us, and we don't need to think. It just tells us who the best is. And we go, excuse me, Mr. Wizard of Oz, who is the best? And he goes, the worst is Ziwu this year. And they go, I knew it was. Yeah, the wizard said it was Ziwu. Like, I don't get it, mate. Like, when you actually know like the mechanics of how it works, like that is a little shit cunt from a Balkan country behind a fucking curtain. If you whip it back, you can have a discussion with him. Why would you take what he says at face value? Because what's stupid, right, is this. I've said this the whole time CSGO's been going on. There's 2 premises here, right? Either these guys for HLTV are the most next level fucking god tier analysts ever, but just decided to do nothing with it, or they just refuse to put their knowledge to the test. Because where's all the content, for fuck's sake? Well, if I'm some super expert, I watch every tournament, everything. I'm not just doing 20 single pieces about who's 19 and who's 18. I have content pieces coming out the fucking arsehole.
No, you'll notice that when they do try to do some additional shoulder content, like when they try to make like the top 20 teams or top 10 teams of 2020, and it's different than the ranking. It's like, here's your team ranking for the entire year. They just got completely,
Yeah. Some of those make no sense.
Yeah. And people were just, they kept saying like, oh, but didn't you read this really long paragraph about our metrics and stuff? And, didn't you see that this is also a completely different paragraph than it was last year? It's like, okay, man. I mean, at least they're going in the right direction by explaining some of the stuff. Like,
sure.
You can't expect it to be, you can't expect them to even do that more often, because where's the incentive for them to continue being more verbal about it and being more.
I'll give you a little bit of juice though. One thing you might actually enjoy. Every player has fucking contributed to that shit as well, because every time it's a bit like the real reason as to why all awards end up looking legit, even if they're totally not. It's that the motherfucker who wins it can't help but go, wow, thanks guys, I've won the game awards this year. And then in doing so, they stupidly give it legitimacy. It's the same with the HLTV one. Because everyone who ever was on that top 20 list wants to be like, wow, look guys, I'm the 17th best. But look, mom, 17th. Like, because they've all done that way too many times. Now they've painted themselves into a corner. So all I'll tell you is, as this. I knew the day that HLTV published that top 10 teams of 2020 article, because that was the day when I opened up my Twitter in the morning. I had all fucking DMs from all the people in like the second, third, fourth teams. Like, are you doing a top 10 teams of 2020, Thorin? I've always enjoyed your take. Like, your guys are so transparent. This is ridiculous. Like, at that point, the question just may as well say, would you write an article that says I was in number one team of the year? Like, but they don't do that because they think they're like, by the way, they all think they're like next level ahead of me and that I can't figure out, you know.
Right?
Yeah, I've always liked your writing, Thorin. So ridiculous, isn't it? It's like so transparent.
Just so they can say they got number
good.
one in somebody's list. Yeah. Jesus.
The shit list of ass kissing.
Yeah, there you go.
I just wish that HLZ would show the year-long ranking all year round. So you could
Can't really do that because like CS is year round. Like it changes.
Well, they literally
like,
do with their team ranking, but then they say,
Oh, right, I see.
Yeah.
Basically, Andrew, you want them to sort of do like in the NFL, they do like a race to the MVP where, you know, from week one, you start like,
I
here's
think
the
it's more like
forecast.
tennis.
You want something like that?
I think it more like tennis because like the thing that's really cool about tennis, if you follow it all year round, is people have to defend their ranking points, and it adds like more hype to the tournament the next year, where you're like, oh my goodness, if Nadal doesn't win the next like 3 tournaments, like he
Right,
did last
yes.
year,
Or make at least the semis or whatever it is. Yeah, sure.
like he has to win like one of the 3. Or
It's a good narrative framing technique for sure.
yeah,
I
that's
agree.
because the thing I always find with esports is we have like the discussion is always basically on like current form, and if like tennis was done in the same way, there would have been a point in time when Nick Kyrgios was like number 2 in the world. It was like there was one of the, like the American like Miami Indian Wells period where he just did really well at both. If that was esports, he would be like, oh, he's the second best player. But because it's done over a year period, people go, man, never reached his potential. And I think it would be interesting to have like the current form guide one we have now, as well as like the one that the Astralises and stuff are going to do better at. Because it's like, like this is the kind of longevity one to see how well done over the whole year, how much can they maintain it. And then there's like the heroic, like, oh wow, heroic had a good bit there. It's a good narrative thing, but also, yeah, I don't like how just a tiny bit of form can get you to world number 1.
I also think as well, mate, like, I definitely agree with that as like a premise. Like, there's definitely been too many people have like nicked it for 1 week last year or whatever the fuck, where they would change around. But even worse, like, I don't know why people keep acting, like I say, like it's a supercomputer figuring this shit out. Once you get past about 15 in the world, even on HLTVs, it just becomes complete bobkiss. Like, I'll go there right now, right? Here we go, guys. So number 27 team in the entire world of CSGO is Nemiga from Belarus. Right, well, there we go then. I guess the computer says Nemiga from Belarus, so nobody below them. Like, what are we even talking about? What even is this system? Like, in what universe is Nemiga from Belarus in the top 30 in Counter-Strike? It's a broken system, you know?
It also
that means at that point, the criteria must have been, like, I would imagine that just means they, like, made it far enough in a bunch of online qualifiers, or they were at the absolute bottom of, like, a real tournament that someone else better didn't play in, you know?
Probably, yeah.
That's exactly it. Because once you get enough invitations to keep earning points at all, then you keep earning points and you keep climbing up. So the real 27th in the world is probably some team that nobody's ever heard of and nobody ever will hear of.
Basically, the funny thing is, here's another thing they never tell you about in the history of in the history of Counter-Strike, by the way. There wasn't even a ranking from HLTV until something like, I'm going to say, like the fucking latter part of 2015 or something. They just didn't exist. So when I actually did my rankings first, which was in 2014 sometime, the whole reason I invented them was exactly to be able to do that. Was that if some team won a bunch of tier 2 tournaments, but they would never even win, like, you know, best of 3 in a real tournament, and then the other team finished 8th in a bunch of the real tournaments, my eye test is what allows me to know that North finishing 8th makes them better than, I don't know, some fucking CIS team winning some small LAN. Like, the problem is the computer can almost never do that. It has a very hard time figuring those things because it's a qualitative judgment, isn't it? Like, it has nothing to directly contrast. So the problem with all these systems as well is once you turn them loose, you control at that point in time. You can only change the inputs. So Like, to me, that system's just massively flawed. It's just, again, what it allows people to do is instead of having to sit down and go, yeah, it's a fucking nightmare trying to figure out who the 27th best team in the world is, you go, no, it isn't. Look, it says here on the screen. It's like, all right, well, cool. Get the beers in, mate. No need. Fucking hell, I thought we were going to have a long night there. It's like, basically, these things, it's basically one of the most dangerous things about authority, isn't it? It's that everyone likes to pretend like, oh, bloody authority. Mate, people love being told what to think and do. They fucking love it. Because the second they do that, there you go. I don't have the responsibility. I have to do it myself. Now, if it's even wrong, by the way, doesn't matter that it's wrong because I didn't make the choice, so just blame the guy that said it was wrong. I think people love that shit for that exact reason. It's the reason why, no matter what anyone says, literally the most slam dunk piece of content I can do, to this day, by the way, is to publish new editions of those rankings. Like, if I was cynical, I'd do it literally every 2 weeks, like HLTV style. Every single one I ever publish gets like an absurd average amount of views and always gets hundreds of comments of people arguing. Just because, like in my case, it's not that they want me to be right. I use the opposite swag. Everyone trying to tell me why I'm wrong. But it's the same mechanism, essentially, you know. In the same way as when HLTV says who's number 2 in the world, they just mindfuck themselves that it's right. If I said, and we all, of course, need to keep breathing air, they'd all mindfuck themselves to explain why you don't need to breathe air and how that's actually like a bigoted statement or something, you know. Just the same mechanism reversed, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, too, is that because it's all done with a black box algorithm that nobody knows the source to, besides, obviously, HLTV themselves, you don't have any intrinsic human element that's like a specific bias. Like, here are my criteria for judging who the best teams are going to be, and here's how I weight things. And like that is still a bias, but if it's laid out, you can make objective.
Consider this, right? Imagine someone saying, "Oh, what was the food like at that place?" And then someone just go, "Whoa. You know that guy's biased, right? He's a food critic. Why don't we just take an amalgam of every person who ever ate there and just aggregate it? Go, well, I don't even know those people. And what no, it's scientific, bro. Scientific. So it's actually a 4 out of 10. Meanwhile, the guy who's the food critic, if you haven't figured out where this analogy is going, we want him to be biased. We want him to have very specific tastes and explain based on those tastes exactly what he likes and doesn't like about that thing. I feel like it's the most misunderstood aspect of all because it's why, if you notice, I always tell those other analysts, stop saying you aren't biased, you fucking idiot, and lean into it. The real joke here is the idea that we're pretending we're not biased. The very fact I am biased is the only reason anyone would listen to a video like this. If I just went, well, I have an opinion, but, you know, I wouldn't want to unduly influence anyone, so I won't give it. I'll just explain all the possible scenarios. And that's about the most boring shit of all time, isn't it? You want someone to have an opinion.
This would be the same like thing as when Gordon Ramsay said, "Oh, I make banging jambalaya," makes it in front of a traditional guy, and the guy tastes it, is like, "This is garbage." Never saw that one.
No, did that really happen?
Yeah, that really.
I couldn't believe it. Yeah,
that really happened.
Sure.
I think,
That's perfect, though.
Playing into your biases is always more fun. Like you, like Monty doing it he always does it well in everything he's in. Like you're ripping off a shirt and having like I think it was was that Overwatch, ripped off a shirt and had America, and then he had ripped off it again. It was Korea.
Yes.
Like that. Like, yeah, like he plays that well. Like in regular sports, I think Neville and Carragher do that well.
Oh yeah, for sure.
They actually do it really well both ways, and that where their bias is, but then they'll give you like real analysis as well of like, oh, I really want Man United to win, but I don't think they will because of this reason.
Yes.
But like Neville will be cheering them on if they do. Like, I think I don't know why people have to pretend they aren't also fans. Like analysts, I don't know, I feel like they just like. They think people want them to be robots who just tell them about the games. Like, no, people also want to know that you're invested. It's like watching Michael Irvin be like hyped up about the Cowboys was always fun. Like, yeah, you want the people being serious about analysts as well, but having that guy is like, I don't know, he's a fan, so it makes you feel better at being a fan of something.
Like, part of the problem as well, it's a very common issue, is that people don't tell the truth when they give you feedback. Kind of goes back to the original topic about Valve. Like, yeah, I've made this point a million times. The person on Reddit who goes, well, this is shit, look, he didn't even give any examples in a video of where it happened or break it down. If you make the video he describes, that person will never click that video in a million years. So it doesn't matter that he says he wants it. He's not telling the truth. Now, sometimes they're doing that maliciously. They're just a liar and they're just wasting your time. Sometimes they're even earnest. Like, I've seen people describe all sorts. Like, I'll give you one of the maddest ones. When I hired my YouTube team of people to help me with like the thumbnails and all that stuff, maybe like, I don't know, I'm going to say like, what, 5 months ago now? Wasn't that long ago. I had people who were putting messages like, I've been a huge fan of your channel for a long time, but it actually turns me off when the title's clickbait. It's like, how does that help me? What the fuck does that feedback even mean, mate? So you want me to not make the clickbait that made you see the video and have a response to it, and then you'll not click a video that doesn't exist or that exists that you don't know about, and then I'm supposed to at the end go like, so was I supposed to put the clickbait or not? I still can't figure out which one it is. Like people ask for stuff they don't know that they actually want, basically. Like, basically people just grumble for the sake of grumbling, don't they? So one of the problems I have is most of the people who say you're biased, if I had like a universal translator that translated what they were actually thinking, here's what it would say. You said something about the team that I like and you didn't make them sound as good as I think they are. Because I tell you what, if you say the same thing about the team they hate, they'll be loving it. They'll go, he's an unbiased analyst.
Yeah.
Even though it's the same bias, you know. Yeah, of course. I've even done it, mate. I know a lot of you guys are from League of Legends, but this isn't even some like pet theory. I legitimately criticised TSM in all the ways that they were deficient. And then when they had a massive scenario, it was after Season 6 Worlds in the end of 2016, where they were like considered like, you know, a top 5 team in the world. And then they bombed the whole tournament and went out in the group stage. When I then did a written article that was like defending the fact that like just because in a small sample size tournament they went out, doesn't mean they were like a bad team. Then you had TSM fans who were like, finally, some unbiased journalism from him. You know, even though essentially I'd changed nothing, I just wrote the TSM. I essentially just said TSM don't suck. And they were like, right, now he's talking. Yeah. Good. I like this.
I'll read this one.
TSM fans around the world rejoicing. Thorin's praising TSM. Go!
Basically, yeah.
What gets me about it too is that, so you could put it this way as well, as far as the biased analyst goes, is that, you know, Monte Cristo was brought up, right? And everybody who remembers the Season 3 World skit where he blows on his train whistle and says, that's spin, right? It took Riot so many years before they had anything even comparable to something like that from their own talent, because they were like plastic, right? Because they weren't allowing them to breathe. And that's why the LEC popped off with viewership more so a little bit more recently, because they were trying to do something to that effect. And it just took them years. Like, they had an example of it working, and you know, that maybe that was them. That's like going back to the analysts who were predicting against Monte Cristo in that final, actually, funnily enough, where they're like, they're trying to almost play too far into the whole biased angle, I think, where they were all predicting the, you know, Starhorn Royal Club against SK Telecom, and then the traditional media are reporting it as an upset when it obviously was not an upset.
I really enjoyed it when he's like, the second part of it goes, and now I'm selling tickets to the hype train.
Yeah.
Starts handing out tickets. Yeah. So good. And then people go like, nah, I don't need it, ripping it up and stuff. And he's like, you're going to regret not getting on the hype train.
Yeah.
And he was right all along.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, it's a great piece of showmanship on the broadcast, and stuff that Riot themselves just never had in their own tournaments, in later on in Worlds or whatever. You know.
Right, here's how you know the whole bias angle doesn't make any sense. Right, just in your own head, obviously you can pick your own esports games you come from. Start trying to think of like your top 5 favourite broadcast people of all time, right? They're all biased as fuck. Of course they are. Essentially, bias is just having a human personality and allowing it to interface with your understanding and competence towards your job. It's literally the defining factor that make any of these people really interesting. Like, if Anders only casted and never let any of his personality in, would it be as good? No, of course not. Would you, like, basically the only people who come anywhere close to appearing to be unbiased, remember, that just means the least amount of fans think they hate their team.
That's so bland.
Is people like Maniac, right? And the problem Maniac has is this. On the one hand, the fact he is like that means he could be on any desk, but it also means he will also need someone else on the desk. The difference is this. You could clone me 3 times and I could just do a desk just me and myself. And we'd all have different takes and argue with each other. Maniac, if you had 4 of them, where's that going to go? You can only have one Maniac in that sense.
It's going to be too bland.
Yeah. So he serves his role very well, but I feel like even that just shows that, like, that's the exception that proves the rule, mate. That you basically generally, and also,
extra pieces.
and by the way, here's the real inside scoop as well. That's just who Maniac is as a person. That isn't for camera. Like, the point is, he just is not an offensive person. He's not very abrasive. So the way he would phrase it, even in real life, it obviously wouldn't be as ridiculous as it is on camera, but he would be careful. He was couching it in a certain way. He wouldn't hurt someone's feelings. So even he is actually being biased. He's just doing it in a different way, you know.
I think what people actually should be upset by is bias that's pretending to be objective.
Oh, it's the worst, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like that league example you're talking about where, like, I don't know league, but I'm guessing, like, T1 were the best team, and they all just picked against it for some unknown stupid reason.
They just did it because they didn't want to all seem like they were picking the Korean team, and since Monty's whole shtick is like, I'm the guy who thinks Korea's the best, so they essentially were trying to be contrarians and say the Chinese team would win.
But literally, Korea's 3 best teams were better, so...
That's the bias. Like, I guess the example for CS was, like, I can't remember which major it was called now. The one that Australians were going in, like, as the absurd favourites, like, when they, with that, like, absurd run.
Was that the one where they lost to Gambit?
No. That was, that was
one after.
You mean the one they won,
the one,
right? Not
the one they won after, like, they had gone, I can't remember. Anyway, well, on that, the major when they, like, the first Magic's major, I guess, and it was such a massive favourite. But every single desk for every single round kept on picking against them. And then, like, halfway through the tournament, something like that, they were like, oh, we just want it to be more fun. Like, yeah, but now you've just, like, kind of misrepresented the matches. Like,
yes.
And you've not even said that. You've not even said, like, the Anders would go, oh, I hope...
He'd give a silly reason, yeah, of course.
And he would say, it was like, oh, I think it'd be really fun.
Yes.
He had, like, some mad thing about... Like,
he actually has the best stupid predictions, if you've noticed. Because he doesn't just do it for no reason. He always has some stupid angle on it, doesn't he? He didn't just pick it just to be different. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but, like, trying to pick that this team was better than Australia was just stupid. Because you've got, like, heaps of people who don't watch any other tournaments going, oh, I guess Australia suck. Like
put it this way, if you've watched a lot of CS, there's a video I'm going to do soon because I'm specifically doing it based on CSGO, so it's going to hurt some people's feelings, but I don't give a fuck. I'm basically going to, like, point out, like, the most classic tropes of fucked up analyst desk stuff, exactly what we're talking about here. So another classic one goes like this. Well, one of us has to pick the other team to win the game. Like, there's a classic one. There's a million of them, and obviously I know them all because I've worked all these desks. And crucially, one of the reasons I'm going to make this video is I've fucking put in so many hours behind the scenes trying to, like, you know, persuade these guys to come over to my side to it or point out the problems. And a lot of them genuinely think this is, like, part of how you have to do a broadcast. So, for example, in the case I just gave there, when they say, like the obvious example would be, let's say a Vanguard is playing Astralis in the final of the major like they were. Some of them actually think one of the people on the desk has to pick a Vanguard to win the game. Otherwise, they believe that makes, you know, the game boring, it's a foregone conclusion, you know, there's no spice, like, all these factors. And basically, I'll explain it all in the video. Obviously, I disagree completely, but that's, like, there's a lot of that stuff goes on the desk. And the weirdest thing about it is, I don't know if you've ever seen this, like, interesting way of explaining how people become socially conditioned. It's a very brief explanation. It goes like this. If there's a bunch of monkeys, 10 monkeys in a room, and there's a ladder, but if any of them climbs up to the top of the ladder to get this banana that's hanging, someone outside of the room just, like, pushes a button and a hose shoots you off the ladder with cold water. Right? The premise goes like this. The first set of monkeys do that, and obviously all start fighting each other trying to get up the ladder. The water splashes them, and they run back down in fear, right? And they're being conditioned that if you go up the ladder, you get sprayed with water. Now, supposedly, if you take out, like, 2 of those 10 monkeys and put in 2 new monkeys that never saw anyone get splashed with the water...
Try.
Yeah, imagine the premise is one of those monkeys tries to go up and one of the other ones grabs him because essentially he knows, like, we all get fucked up with water if you do that. Eventually, supposedly, you can take all 10 of the original monkeys out of the room and the next 10 monkeys will continue the behavior they learned from the other ones of, like, don't ever let another monkey climb the ladder, even though none of them ever actually suffered the consequence of climbing the ladder and find out what happens. Basically, that same premise works with, like, people in successful industries, because what happens is all the people I'm talking about in broadcast, they weren't there from day one. So when they join a broadcast, they're doing weird things like thinking of like an amalgamation of all the people they've seen on a broadcast or what they imagine, the future of esports is. Like in this case, well, if people who are casuals on TV watch, so we have to make them believe the other team can win. Like they're taking all these weird concepts that they've like essentially decided are givens, and they've never questioned them, and then now they're making like literally their decisions based on it. And half of them are just like these examples here are just shit, aren't they? And they don't add anything to the game even. They're just sort of a weird blind spot, which I'm going to describe it in the video, that just exists for some bizarre reason, and people are using like cargo cult thinking and just keep doing it year after year after year. Even if they sat down and thought about it, we can just get rid of some of these things and have a way better desk.
Yeah. And that's another major point as well, is that you mentioned earlier that like we've got to make it people believe that a Vanguard might be able to beat Astralis, but that's dishonest, like on its face. You can talk about how impressive a Vanguard's run was here, but it doesn't, like, it's actually more appropriate for the desk. So you have to figure out a way to present it in a more interesting manner than simply saying it's going to be a stomp. But the content of the desk has to be talking about how unlikely any sort of upset would be given Astralis's absolute dominance up until that point. And yet Avangard is still sitting there as like, somebody would have to argue a case for them. You could talk about their win conditions. You can talk about what they're going to look to do. Like, you could break it down. You can be analytical, but you got to be honest. Like, you can't just fake it. You can't just say, actually, Starhorn Royal Club, we're going to vote 3-1 that they're going to take this, even though SK Telecom then goes on to 3-0 them because they were just definitively the better team.
The irony is this. There is actually a way you could do what they want. They just haven't thought it through. And it is literally to just do what De Beers did back on that old talk show I did, Put Up or Shut Up.
Yeah.
If people don't know, as far as I know, it was never overtly discussed. But it was an obvious unwritten rule, if you understand anything about social dynamics, that De Beers' whole role on the show was to be the comedic relief, never be allowed to win. And because he was never allowed to win, obviously just give the stupid contrarian examples all the time. So the joke was, there was an episode like this where when we were discussing, who the best player is, instead of it being like simple or whatever, he picked like some outrageous player that like never would be, because the joke is it is his job to give the wrong answer. Like, you could do that. You could have a guy on the desk where the joke is, what everyone else scores with, he'll always go against them. That might even work as a character. It's just the problem is, it's just whack if that's someone who actually is trying to then be a serious analyst at the same time. It's like be one or the other.
It won't work if it's like a person who's taken too serious.
You did have a great reversal at some point where you had to argue for the existence of Santa Claus, Thorin. That was very good.
Except the problem with that is I just slam dunked it, mate. That was an appropriate argument. Yeah. People don't even realise as well, that's not even a joke. That is just one of those ones where I just got super lucky.
Yeah.
That if anyone's ever heard any of those Terence McKenna talks, I'm pretty sure he had one of those that was in it. Like, it was one of those ones where I just accidentally backdoored my way into some like mad obscure topic I did actually know a decent amount. Because what's bad is if no one's ever gone and looked it up, like, I think what people think I was doing there, Prologo, is they think I just like had the gift of the gab and I just sort of like held everyone's attention, but it was all like nonsense. Go and Google what I wrote. What I wrote is actually literally what happened there. Like, I wasn't even making it up. I just got lucky, like I say that. I just happened to know that topic. Because I remember when he said that, just thinking like, well, no one else is going to have the angle that Santa Claus is in fact real, are they? So this is going to be the one. It's actually like low-key. It's almost like we'd set it up, but we hadn't. Like, it low-key made me just look like a god, because it was like some mad fucking alley-oop that he threw me, wasn't it?
Yeah. No, it was great. There's one last way for him to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
And then the best part is, if people don't remember, is after I said that whole thing, then Moses just has to like explain why Santa Claus isn't real, but he's got nothing left out, has he? Yeah, exactly. So what's he going to say? Exactly. There's nothing like. So even though because that was actually what made that show fun. If
Moses
people don't
was
know,
convinced at that point.
Yeah, if people don't know, the whole premise of that show wasn't that you're actually given the right answer. It's just that you have to be able to argue for it.
Yeah.
So if people don't know, I'll even give people a little bit of the scoop here. What you would do before the show is you would all submit like your top 3 answers to the question. And then on some of them, he would just say, because he would make it fair, like, right, on the one that of who the best player is now, I'm going to give him simple and you have to take Device, for example. So in that scenario, it doesn't matter that no one thinks Device is the best. The idea is, what if I can make an amazing argument that Device is? which is basically the premise of that show. It's a pretty fun concept all in all.
That's even like a debate strategy or like an intellectual exercise as well. Is just to argue for something that you don't actually believe in necessarily, or you. It's
because most people are just bad at arguing, unfortunately. Yeah. I don't even say that, by the way, as like some mad diss. It's a skill. You have to learn it. It takes a long time, you know. Like even being knowledgeable and knowing what you talk about is totally different from being able to argue. Like I actually feel like at least in a short-term scenario, just being good at arguing is actually way more valuable than knowing what you're talking about.
I forgot, like someone actually like has stated before, like make sure you argue for something, even though it's not the proper thing. But make sure you argue for it, because then when other people discredit it, that's why you win, or something like that.
It's like you know the appropriate response to that sort of argumentation. Like it's like steel manning, right? If you argue for your opposition and then still dissolve it, still are able to defeat it in the argument, right?
Yes.
You're able to, like, that just shows that you were way more prepared in the subject, and in theory it's supposed to convince a lot more people if you can do that.
Oh, by the way, there's a topic, Andrew, that we should, because we're basically coming to the end now, but I'll use that actually to tie it up. That's also the number one problem with all those like sports, like GOAT type debates, is that none of the people taking part could steelman the other person's argument. And that's why you don't get interesting discussions. Like, you know this because you use the NFL analogy. If I go and ask right now some Tom Brady stan what Peyton Manning's career was like, they're not going to give me anywhere close to like an appropriate fucking expert. They're going to make him sound like the most trash can player of all time. But then the problem is the same idiot that's the Peyton Manning fans going to do the same thing. They're going to go, Tom Brady is just a system quarterback. That's some shit from like his first 3 years, mate. So like half the problem is I almost think that's like the new standard we need. It's like you should steel man each other's fucking arguments before you even debate them, you know, just to show you know the argument.
Yeah, make sure everybody's on the same page. That way we're not talking around each other. That way you know as well, one of my major complaints with even engaging with people is that I don't know if they're arguing in good faith. Like, I have no guarantee that that's the case. But if you have to do that just to get in the door, just to get us started, definitely helps.
Like, I'll actually tie it into a take I do have, which is why I find all those GOAT debate type things so difficult if we use, like, super small sample size, like, how many majors did you win? If I'm doing, like, a scenario of, like, right, I take the player and I drop him with, you know, an equal amount of skilled teammates. How does he do? Tell you what, of all the star players in history, I don't think Goldira's winning any majors, mate. Like, to me, that guy was on almost the perfect team for him. Everything about it just looked amazing, the setup. Like, the difference is, Simple's won 0 majors, but I could see 1 billion random generic teams where it's possible he wins from, you know.
Yeah, I think Coldzera will have to do a lot in the next few years to convince people like that he wasn't like a guy in the perfect system, because he like in 2016 everyone hated you for saying that, but I think at this point it's kind of gone the other way.
Yeah, I feel like most people get it now how Simple can be better than Coldzera, you know. But I will say though, I don't think that, like, obviously his fans would never accept that if they were still number one though.
Oh, of course not.
The Brazilians, that is, you know.
The what about Coldzera meme lives on. I've got a bit of a question since we went back to that GOAT debate thing in the first place.
It's not to be the last one, but let's do it.
Sure. Yeah. The thought that I had was, obviously we keep talking about majors, and that's like a major, no pun intended, part of how we decide whether or not something is worthwhile as far as like an accomplishment. Did it happen at a major? Did they win a major? I'm wondering when the CS scene in general moves away from that, because we've seen tournaments that have the same prize pool as the majors, but with better formats, with double limb, with things that we haven't had in majors before. Obviously, a lot of them have been more like within the last year and plagued with the online stuff. But at what point do we get to the point? Is it even possible to get to the point where we've got $2 million, $5 million prize pools, where it's like majors by extension or by comparison are dwarfed by not only the prize pool, but the teams that are involved, and the format is more robust and winning just means more.
Sadly, I don't think it'll ever matter, mate. The real reason why, I mean, Andrew should know this coming from tennis, is like, it's the same thing before about like HLTV. People want there to be one tournament that matters, so they don't have to think about all the others. So basically, like, if you ever talk to someone who's a fan of tennis, right, and they're debating who the greatest players are, again, you'll notice that they just do the same thing. Like Grand Slam's all that exists. Like, I'm always amazed, Andrew, that when people bring up, because all the Nadal fans have basically had like 10, 15 years of time to practice why Roger Federer can't be the best player ever. And you'll notice one thing they always do, mate, is they never say a fucking single word about World Tour finals. Those tournaments just don't exist.
Also, the fact that like Valve like uses stickers as an engagement tool for the community or whatever, like makes it so that people are more active towards that tournament than any other tournament we have in Counter-Strike.
Yeah, if you've noticed, you can actually have you could actually have 10 times the prize money and even way better teams, but unfortunately, the viewership will never somehow get near the major, presumably because Valve has to really be the ones who push it, I guess.
I think for me, I would only value the other tournaments higher than the majors if it appeared like the players did as well. And because that's like, till now, even when people have said, oh, the other tournaments are better, in the majors, there are enough big players who choke that I'm like, well, they still value it. Like,
they must,
the fact that they feel the pressure so much more than in like, if you're in like I am Katowice when it's not called a major, they'll just like bang out the final. Put them, tell them it's a final, and all of a sudden they're like stressed out and they can't perform, and I'm just like, okay, as long as that's happening, that's the most important tournament, because that's the one where you see like all the pressure, everything on them. Like,
it's basically, if you don't know, like I know this is before your time, it's actually why we call them majors in 1.6 when they didn't have an official title. They were just basically the best tournaments, because the same thing happened, mate. If, as a community, we all called like the World Cyber Games the major, it didn't matter that in the latter years it was a way more inferior tournament. Motherfuckers would be so scared in that final because it was a gold medal game in the way that they weren't at a tournament that had better teams a month later, like a DreamHack Winter or something.
Yeah, it's like the same reason why it was crazy to see the old Dignitas roster before they were TSM choke in the finals, but smash out the quarters or semis or group stages against the same teams. It's like it's the same kind of mental thing happening to those kinds of players in the different situations. And that kind of makes me think it must be more of an ephemeral mind space thing, as long as the players and the viewers and all the support staff and all this other stuff, as long as they all value the tournament being called the major or having the word major in its name, then yeah, it probably is never going to happen. But I thought it was an interesting thought experiment to run by you guys anyway.
Because, by the way, like the one side thing of that is, this is also why I don't think, unfortunately, my goals for esports will ever align with like what most people want. Because I feel like most people want the opposite. They want just the one world. Even people in CS beg for it every year. They just want the one big world championship to decide everything, to tell them who the best team was, who the greatest of all time is, and which the one tournament you have to win is. Whereas, funnily enough, the whole reason I like sports like tennis is that you get 4 chances a year, and there's other sort of not as meaningful tournaments, but extremely meaningful ones for your like Olympics and stuff. Like, to me, I want to be as big a sample size as possible generally.
Yeah. Why have just one TI, right?
That's also why I like the ranking in tennis, because you can get people who don't even follow the other tournaments accept the ranking. In that, like in Australia, people watch the Australian Open. They don't watch any other tournament, but they still go, like Nadal's number 1 this year. Okay, I guess he's the best. Like, they didn't watch him win any tournaments because he never wins the Australian Open. But they still go, they accept that throughout the rest of the year, he was really good. And I like that, having something that gives the people who don't even watch other tournaments a way to know who was actually good in like DreamHack or something like that. It's like, that person did well. But I think like the big thing of the majors and stuff like that is, we're not really deciding who's the best at Counter-Strike. In terms of like, in tennis, I still think the best tennis player is Roger Federer. But we're not trying to determine the best tennis player. We're trying to determine who can play tennis the best under the pressure of trying to win in front of a crowd and with all like history on your side and like history against you and all that type of thing. We're trying to like a thing that I found really interesting is seeing like players who were really good in finals. As they get towards the historic stuff, like I'd say Serena Williams is like this. As soon as she started making it a goal to overtake Margaret Court, she couldn't win a final. Because now it's not just like, another final. It's history matters to her. Being the best of all time matters to her. And now there's more pressure on her from herself, and now she can't win. So it's like, you're not just trying to find out like who would win a game in a void.
Sure. I mean, I could actually bring this all full circle, which is basically most people also do think they are saying who the best player ever was when they say the greatest. The irony is this. The actual phrasing of like greatest, if people thought about how it could be used, actually it would be more appropriate to what you're describing, like the idea of overcoming the greatest challenge. The idea is you are a great man because look at what you overcame. I think that's actually probably a more reasonable category to do. It's just that's not what any of them are arguing about.
Like, to me, the
want that
major is
person to win.
basically us figuring out which team is best every 6 months.
Sure. This video was kindly supported by Lagger15, Pronogo, Andrew, Animosity, ErikHillestad, Andreas Kroknes, Jensen Goh, Hades, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, Dean Tanglis, Tobias Bernasconi, Alexander Rao, and as always, a special thanks goes out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Do you want to ask some sort of a topic or suggest the guest for some upcoming content I have? Do you want to know something in my monthly video AMA? Do you want teasers, see who the next guests are for my content? Or maybe you want to take part in one of those lengthy audio discussions with me? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.